and welcome to Contourcast. My name's Kat Boyd and I'm joined with my lovely co-host David Jameson.
How's it going? I'm a wee bit. I've obviously been hit by the sun. I didn't really notice that until I'm looking at this. I'm coming across a wee bit. Andrew Neil of GB News. Seen those pictures of him where he's totally orange.
No, I haven't. I haven't seen them. But I have followed some of the GB News frenzy on social media.
Those kind of like Twitter accounts where they're documenting all the fuck ups, they're not over exaggerating it or cherry picking it. Like I've watched it a couple of times, but sort of half an hour ago, and honestly, it's every couple of minutes. Every couple of minutes, some music starts randomly playing. People are getting the lines all wrong, introducing wrong segments. It's quite astonishing how mad it is.
I like when that happens to the right.
Yeah.
I find it it's enjoyable because usually that's like our kind of fuck up.
Yeah, I it sets you to thinking about a few sort of far left party political broadcasts over the years. You know what I mean?
Yes, one of which is really famous. Should we tell people to check it out?
Yeah, if you've not seen this, I can't even remember what name this outfit eventually ended up with, but it was Tommy Sheridan, and it must have been for the elections. God, what election would it have been? The Scottish elections. It might have been 2011. Right?
Surely it's further back than that.
I think it might be 2011.
I also think it's Tusk.
Yeah, I think it ended up being called something like Tusk Solidarity or Tusk
Yeah,
Tommy
that's
Sheridan.
right. That's right. I'm checking it out on
Great
YouTube
names.
right now. Honestly, David and I are not doing this broadcast any type of justice. I found it, right? It's called Scottish Tusk PPB, right? It has 3.2k views.
Half of those are me.
At least half of those are you. We recommend that listeners check it out for some absolutely glorious left-wing aesthetics, Scottish left-wing aesthetics.
Yeah, it's very Scottish. So yeah, I mean, usually it's the left doing that, but no, GB News is running at a close second. And another thing that's hilarious about it is the whole thing is we are not the metropolitan bubble. They've misspelled every town they've gone to. We've had Newscastle with an S, Newscastle. We've had Starling rather than Stirling, Starling with an E, Starling in Scotland. So yeah, it's going very well.
Yeah, so I don't see any of it, but basically you're telling everyone that today you look a bit Andrew Neil.
Yes. Which, what is it? Was Orwell who said something like, by the age of 50, you have the face you deserve? Well, Andrew Neil has the face he deserves. And I'll, probably end up with quite a similar kind of bag puss, swollen scrotum kind of look going on.
It's a look that's called tanned bag puss.
Tanned bag puss, yeah.
It's a tanned bag puss of a look. Sort of like soft and saggy, but still leathery.
Yeah, I like battered fart. Like deep fried fart is is the kind of look he's got going on at the moment.
I really don't know what to make of that. I don't know how I feel about
that. So anyway,
let's talk about politics. So first on our agenda today is the Labour Party. That's all it says, the Labour Party, who are going through some kind of crisis, as usual. This is about the outcome of the vote in Chesham and Amersham by-election.
Yeah, so the Liberal Democrats have scored a kind of freak victory. Looks like there was a degree of tactical voting going on. The Labour vote is 600 and something, which, according to a couple of people, is roughly the party membership in the area. So that is, I mean, speaking of the far left, that's a far left style vote. It's just members and their family.
Yeah, so it's obviously never really been like a popular seat for the Labour Party,
No.
but this vote is, I mean, it is shocking. So I think it's about, I think 622 votes that they got represents like 1.6 of the total votes. Because I wanted to check out, well, it is obviously like a terrible number, but like just how bad is it compared to the last elect? How bad is it compared to 2019?
And 2019 was bad.
And 2019 was bad, yeah. So I mean, it's a huge drop. It is a massive drop compared to like the previous election.
Mm-hmm. John Curtis says that it's Labour's worst ever by-election result. I don't know what he means by that in terms of, is it the lowest percentage of the vote they've ever had when they've run in a by-election, or if he just means it's like the worst shock in terms of the scale of the collapse of the vote. But that is a measure of it. And there are people drawing all kinds of very funny conclusions from this. One is, this shows that Labour needs to get serious about a progressive alliance and all this kind of stuff, right? And this is some Labour people saying this. I could actually imagine that the logic, not the real project of a so-called progressive alliance, but that as a phenomenon is going to be, it could be one of the ways in which Labour dies, right? So one of the silver linings we were being told in the local elections that were going on at the same time as the Scottish elections was that Labour had picked up representation in places like Worthing, right? Kind of southeast, middle class areas. And I remember thinking, like, no, that's just another sign of decline, right? That's just another sign that the class character of your vote is becoming increasingly middle class and liberal. And that's just part of the breaking of the traditional coalition of Labourism, which is kind of urban intelligentsia plus traditional sort of working class, Northern, Midlands, etc. And Wales and Scotland,
Yeah, of
traditionally.
course.
So that's just further evidence of the decline. This result is more evidence of that dynamic,
Yeah.
right? It's just like the Tories probably are going to have to lose some of their home counties votes.
Yeah, I mean, because their project is not really directed there anymore. Like
Yeah,
ultimately, we're seeing like Johnson try and build like a powerful base in the north and amongst the working class. Like I think that that's actually what we're facing.
it
Um,
probably won't be this extreme, but it is a similar dynamic in some ways to the famous shift that took place between the Democrats and the Republicans,
mm,
where the Republicans used to be broadly the kind of like left wing. I mean, they were the anti-slavery party, of course, and then in the mid 20th century, they sort of swapped places. And the Democrats used to be a very socially conservative party, particularly in the South. Like there is a shift underway here, but anyone on the left who thinks the Lib Dems winning that seat, it points to something useful for the left, is kidding themselves,
yeah,
right?
I mean,
But
it is
all,
like obviously an aggressive like Tory seat. Do you know what I mean? Um, the percentage votes like average out the percentage share of Labour's vote in the last few elections, like it's kind of averaging out at about 12%. So they've got, I mean, this like there's clearly tactical voting, but that would be like probably the biggest success ever for tactical voting if that's
mm,
what's happened. Um,
yeah, and if that becomes a real dynamic, it will be at Labour's expense. What
yeah,
it means is not only have Labour lost the attachment of historic working class areas, it also means that any gains they might pick up from middle class Liberals are going to be split by the Liberal Democrats and the Greens. That's what a progressive alliance means. So why people think that's a good idea for Labour? But anyway, it's all further evidence, and I suspect Batley and Spen will be more evidence of the collapse of Labour's coalition. And let's not forget, we've seen this before in British politics. The Liberal Party disappeared. The once hegemonic party of what you might then have described the left, kind of. I mean, it was a much more kind of ruling class party, um, but then what's Labour today? You know what I mean? It's not a working class party. So the British electoral system has a way of dispatching parties that represent dead projects.
Yeah.
The Liberals represented a dead project by the time of their demise. They were naturally replaced by a party of Labour after the introduction of the franchise and so on. And the Labour Party are a denatured post-working class party who are going to disappear because they don't represent a viable class project. I mean, it's only really in the last couple of years that I've become a believer in the death of Labour Britain kind of hypothesis. And it could be a long drawn out process that looks kind of like the recent by-elections. It's not just that Labour are losing. I mean, they scraped London with Sadiq Khan. I mean, they're even under pressure. They don't have a solid, dependable demographic. You know, they're losing traditional Muslim voters in places like Batley and Spen and Bradford and stuff like that. Apparently, there's some really interesting stuff coming out of Batley. Like, Muslim voters are really angry because they feel that they've basically been persecuted by the Labour Party. Like, people forget that. Like, a lot of the ire during the anti-Semitism witch hunt was projected towards the Muslim community. They feel they've been abandoned, and they have. So, like, shedding votes all over the place, and it's looking pretty chronic.
I mean, for me, where this all started going wrong for Labour was the fudge around Brexit. Like, the fact that they tried to fudge Brexit, the fact that the party was split on this people's vote, second vote again referendum, you know, to decide the terms, all of that sort of stuff. Like, that has been a huge tactical mistake for Labour, and I think that it's haunting them. And I think that Keir Starmer is like very, you know, closely associated with Remain. And he also, let's be honest, like looks like a Remain politician. Like, he looks establishment. So the rejection of Labour in places like Hartlepool in the north, you know, I think goes back to Brexit. I think in this constituency, you're seeing the other side of the fudge coin, where it was like a little bit of Brexit, like we don't want to be the party of Brexit. And what that's done is like that kind of middle ground has then, like, you know, ceded the ground to other parties. You know, you can see that by the jump in like the Green vote, for example, who were obviously part of that, like, you know, People's Vote coalition, anti-Brexit Remainer sort of thing. So that would, I think that there's definitely part of that that's going on as well.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's a longer development. Like, this is part of what's going on with social democratic parties all over Europe. But the Brexit thing was a huge turning point, like huge. And like, honestly, we're going to be talking about it in 10 years as like a major moment in the breaking of the old political format. It's astonishing when you think how deftly the Conservatives used that, right? It instantly created a terrible situation for the Tory party. Tory party in 2016, really, like the leadership, the MPs, etc., totally in favour of Remain. Brexit was a nightmare for them. They knew it would split them from their base, especially once they started trying to resist it or hem Brexit in. They went from a situation of civil war that was only ended, of course, by Boris Johnson literally purging the organisation, right? They went from that situation to a position of total political hegemony overnight by adopting the kind of get Brexit done slogan. And Boris Johnson didn't want Brexit. Like, these people are just pragmatic. They're smart. They understand that sometimes history's moving too strongly in a certain situation for you to stand in the middle of the flow. So you have to ride it and control it, which is what the Tories are trying to do. They rode the Brexit thing so that they could control it. And they've simultaneously managed to take the sting out of Brexit as a disrupting force in British politics and just crush the opposition. And like, Boris Johnson has this huge honeymoon he has at the moment, partly because he was seen as like the one politician who listened, which is an enormously powerful thing in our prevailing political climate, to be the one politician who's different. And that should have been Corbyn's mantle, but it was sacrificed
For
to be part.
so-called electability.
Yeah, for electability, which
Yeah,
is always the huge mistake. It's always the thing of reacting rather than leading. What Boris Johnson did was lead, right? He
yeah,
said, "No, I'm going to take control of this situation, and I'm going to make it work from my ends." And you can do that, and that's a perspective that has completely disappeared. This really weird thing always went on with Labour, where it was like Labour activists and commentators just turned into people with calculators. Sort of like, well, if we take a soft, a soft Brexit position, maybe we can get constituencies X, Y, Z, blah, blah. It's not how the world works. Like, you can actually change the argument by intervening into it.
yeah.
But that kind of self belief has just sort of has disappeared. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens in Batley and Spen. Um, and like they
And
get people
when is
saying,
that?
Uh, well informed as always. It's a couple of weeks or something. A couple of weeks or something. So well informed. But look, see when that happens, right? You get all these people as well saying, then Starmer will have to go, and then what?
Yeah, and
Like
what?
the
Exactly.
Labour Party's bust, like,
Yeah,
and then nothing. Like, there's no one to replace him, and no one, even a brilliant, radical, charismatic figure, I honestly don't think could turn the tides.
but I also like. I think that the problem will be who fucking wants it.
Yeah,
Like, who wants that kind of like? Because this is the thing. I think it is an irreversible like shift.
it certainly seems that
Irreversible,
way.
and it's like just going in one direction, and nobody can really turn it round. So the question is like, who wants to be head of a sinking ship?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
unless you can like absolutely gut the PLP, which is, as Corbyn's project shown, is just not going to happen.
But
Um,
also, the brand is poisonous. Like, the best you could do is what Corbyn did in 2017, right? Now, there were still some morbid symptoms around 2017, we sometimes forget. But he was able to obviously stabilize the project, and he had committed constituencies who loved him, like young people, right? Starmer doesn't have that. Like, the best you could do is reach out to this or that constituency, but the old block looks just shattered beyond repair.
yeah, and then there's also factor in the Unite election,
Mm.
and the reason, I don't know if listeners will have picked up on this, but there's a general secretary election taking place in Unite the Union, which is obviously Britain's biggest union, and the former general secretary Len McCluskey is stepping down. His term is well over. Um, and he was obviously a vocal supporter of Jeremy Corbyn. Unite continued to back Corbyn. They continued to press that type of agenda. They supported Corbyn. They put money into it. Len McCluskey was obviously in the news a lot about it. Really one of Corbyn's major backers. I don't think Corbyn would have survived if it hadn't been for Unite and some other unions, really arguing the toss within the structures and putting their full might into supporting Corbyn and McDonnell. So Len is stepping down. So obviously that has major implications for the Labour Party, where the Labour Party is going. The candidates so far in Unite are Steve Turner, who's seen as the kind of the continuity with Len McCluskey candidate. Up until today, Howard Beckett was standing, who's another Unite officer. He's now withdrawn from the campaign and backed Steve Turner. Then the third candidate on the left that's running is Sharon Graham, who's not vocally left, but she is one of the most effective industrial operators I've ever encountered. She is the mastermind behind all Unite's leverage campaigns. Things like the blacklisting campaign around Crossrail, with Scabby the Ran, all that stuff. But she's also she's the one behind Unite's organising department, which is just like a powerhouse of extending union membership and bargaining cover and all those sorts of things. So I think that I think she's in with a really good shout. And then there's the candidate. There's one candidate on the right, and that's Jared Coyne. And yeah, I assume that out of those I mean, how is this going to play out in terms of Labour? Because if Coyne wins, because there's, the split on the left, um, then it's going to have pretty drastic consequences for anyone in the left who wants to get involved in the Labour leadership to not have the same type of backing that Corbyn did from the biggest union. I mean, you have to remember that like there's a political fund and money from that trade union goes into the Labour Party. You know, it's part of the like this historic movement. But what I'm interested in is like, is this another point of fissure? Like, is this going to be another crack where there's like, if a left candidate is elected, like Sharon, whose whole policy platform is like, our union leaders need to stop focusing on Westminster and start focusing on the workplace. Like that's her whole message. If it's someone like that, does that, refocus the Unite project kind of away from the Labour Party? Is that going to be another break at some point? Because there's always been questions about the union's affiliations to the Labour Party, and if they're no longer the elected voice of the working class, like even more so than now than ever, then what is that relationship going to be like in the future for the trade unions?
Yeah, I mean, I obviously don't know much about the inner life of Unite. It did strike me as like crazy that there were three left candidates and one right candidate. Is obviously a recipe for disaster, and Beckett's now dropped out. But also, there's some weird stuff going on in terms of factional tensions on the left as well. Turner, I take it, is he like the natural successor to Len
Yeah,
McCluskey, right?
yeah,
And he was the official Unite Left candidate.
yeah,
Uh, so you've got kind of three tendencies developing there. Like one is Steve Turner's kind of approach of well, presumably, he'll want political influence in the Labour Party and so on. Presumably not in the same way Len McCluskey sought it, because he had an ally leading the Labour Party. And then Beckett kind of seemed to represent like a certain element of like former Corbynites who wanted to launch an all-out assault on Starmer, using the union as a kind of a launch pad to do that. So, I mean, I'm sure he'd represented good stuff as well, but there was also represented the kind of like frustrated fixation of people on the left about Keir Starmer that's possibly not very healthy. And then you have an argument developing which like is on the plus side is like, yeah, this is what unions are ultimately for, right? I can see the attraction of it. On the other hand, there's always a danger of sort of anti-politics. I don't know her well enough to know if she would go in that direction, but you could be right as well in the sense that it represents, or rather it kind of like predicts a tension between trade unions and Labour re-emerging, especially if Labour end up just shedding seats and they look less and less like a viable alternative government. So yeah, I mean it's a complex picture, but I mean, is it not the case that Coyne ran it really close against Len in the last
yeah,
election?
yeah. See that, and that's a problem. So the way I see it is that there is a discontent within Unite about the focus on Labour, right? So Coyne's whole agenda when he's been running is that the union needs to focus on its members rather than controlling Labour. And he's, you know, looking to, launch an investigation into the fact Unite built this conference centre in Birmingham.
I've
So,
seen that. Yeah.
so what he's doing there, I think is quite clear, is a kind of like, you know, an anti-Len McCluskey message.
Yeah.
And I think that will appeal to a certain base. Um, and he is a right winger as well. So he's on the right of the union. So, yeah, he's talking about like, you know,
Well, I mean,
he's talking about like, he's going for this kind of like anti-establishment vibe, right? And the problem is that like Steve Turner, like whatever people think of him, is seen very much in the like the tradition of Len McCluskey.
right,
Like
okay.
that's the problem. And what will happen, and this is what I don't agree with that's happening on social media, is this like pressure on Sharon Graham to step down, which assumes that Sharon Graham's voters will transfer to Turner. My whole point on this is I don't think they will. There will
Right.
be some, right? Because Sharon's seen as being on the left, and she is on the left. So like the left would just then vote for Turner. But Sharon Graham has like a much wider and deeper reach through like all the organising and leverage work. And she'll probably run a fantastic campaign to get the vote out that Turner's campaign might not be able to reach. So I don't think that there's a guarantee that the people who would vote for Sharon Graham will then just vote for Turner. I think that that's the dilemma. So Sharon Graham's really the only one on the left who can pick up um the refocus, unite on the workplace. Like, does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I get it. I mean, the other side of that though is if the vote is split and Coin does win, then like all of it's out the window in terms of like organizing, like the kind of organizing strategies that Graham's talking about and so on. I mean, my understanding is that he's not like a Dave Prentice. Coin is much more vicious than that, and he's much more
Yeah.
connected to the more kind of anti-left elements around the Labour Party and stuff like that, and the Unite is quite likely to be purged in the event that Coin wins.
The other problem if Coin wins is that um, what kind of relationship does that mean that Unite have with the Labour Party? Although Sharon's talking about like refocusing on the workplace in like sort of similar style, but Coin is looking into like really quite drastic moves against the left. I would argue, and I think that that has knock-on implications for the Labour Party and how it's funded.
Hmm. Well, if the left does lose it, it would be massive blow. I mean, you're right.
I mean, I
It's
think the danger is that like Turner versus Coin is very tightly run. It would be a very tight contest.
mhm.
Whereas I think Graham versus Coin, I think Sharon Graham would win.
Even if Turner stayed in, presumably he
No,
won't.
no, I think that's the problem. Like, if Sharon Graham stays in, then I mean, she would have to like to beat those two. I think it would have to be massive because I think Turner's vote would transfer to Sharon Graham. Do you know what I mean? Because the left would just be like anyone but Coin.
Yeah, yes, I see what you mean. It is a problem then for Graham that Beckett's back Turner.
Yeah, and I know from speaking to some activists in Unite, they were quite surprised at that because they thought if Howard Beckett withdrew, he would support Sharon Graham. But because that's the reality on the ground, is that people who were in Beckett's camp, I think their second preference a lot of the time was for Sharon Graham.
Right.
So just because Beckett's backed Turner doesn't necessarily mean,
That his vote will all go to Turner.
yeah.
Yeah, of course, of course.
God, I hope that our listeners are still awake.
Yeah. Did you keep up with all that? It was a wee bit like discussing, like a novel that other people haven't read. But
Like,
then what happens? So Beckett back at one point there, I said Beckett backing Turner will be bad news for Graham. In the fight against Coin, it's like who the fuck are these people? Uh,
it's like trying to like describe a TV program to
yeah.
someone who hasn't seen it yet, and you can sort of see their eyes glazing over at the prospect. But the thing is, like, whether we like it or not, it is important, and it does have a knock-on impact on the future of the Labour Party, which everyone should be interested in,
Mm-hmm.
even if it's just from a sort of popcorn point of view.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm relegated. I couldn't even tell you what's going on inside my own union, the NUJ. Don't think I could name the general secretary. That's how good a trade unionist I am. But yeah, so when do we find out about that? Let's know this time. Let's not be another battling spend. I don't know, couple of weeks.
The 26th of August.
Right. So we've still got quite a long campaign, but as I understand it, I mean,
I mean, Steve Turner got the most branch nominations by
yeah,
like a mile. Like Coin only just the Coin got like 196 branch nominations, and Steve Turner got over 500.
yeah, but as I understand it, Coin got a similar number of nominations and almost won the
Yeah,
last like elections.
yes,
Yeah.
it was very, very, very close.
Well, how many people voted in the last election roughly?
Oh
Because
fuck! Now you're asking. I have
uh,
no idea. And
um,
also, like union ballot turnouts are historically low
yes,
because I mean this is the madness of it all. You have to do it by like postal ballot. Like you
yeah,
can't do an electronic vote. Like what the fuck is this? Dark Ages.
yeah. Because
Like
Unite
obviously
has
it's a way to like strangle the unions and their engagement with members.
Unite has like 1.2 members, though it's one of those like how big is it really?
1.2 million, not 1.2 members.
1.2 million. It has yeah, it's got one member and a short fella. Um but but yeah, it has 1.2 million members, but does it really? Is always the question with left-wing
Are
organizations.
you wondering if some of them are like maybe point two of them are dead?
Deceased. Uh, yeah.
That was a Galloway voice you just did there.
They are deceased. Uh, don't talk to me about the Unite election. They are deceased. Yeah, so and a lot of them won't be members anymore and so on. But anyway, if you're still with the podcast at this point,
I mean, I would have fucking switched off. I would have switched this off. Absolute shite. Maybe we should put a disclaimer that it will get better, so we just make this last section much more interesting.
yeah, we're now going to talk about some culture war stuff.
Yeah.
So, but unions, right? Fuck that. Now we're going to talk about the culture war.
Yeah, place the unions to one side. Wake
Something
yourself
much
up,
more important
slap
than
about the face, and get ready for some culture war. Specifically, we're going to talk about what I thought was incredible, the Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie essay
Hmm.
that she has published this week called "It Is Obscene: A True Reflection in 3 Parts." I mean, I loved this. I saw it on Twitter and someone had like screenshotted a paragraph from it and then tweeted the link, and I just kind of like skimmed past it. And then I noticed there was like loads of people talking about it, and I got sucked into the Twitter bit of it. But reading it, I thought it was fantastic. A really insightful piece into the culture war and where we are in the culture war as well.
Yeah, so she's a writer, and it reflects on her experiences of running like a writing workshop. Is it in Nigeria? And the students that she sort of made relationships with, and basically, um, she takes one kind of promising, bright young thing on board, and sort of takes her into her home and becomes friends with her and so on, and encourages her in her career. And I love the bit where she says that she helped her promote a book, like a novel or something,
Mm-hmm.
and she said that she really enjoyed the writing in it, but secretly felt that it was like vacuous, like it was pretty, but there was no substance to it. There was no real emotion. There was kind of no real intent. And she kept that quiet and helped to promote the book on the basis of its writing. She, I think she made a distinction between women and trans women, and she was denounced by her former student. And then she kind of recounts a story of this person's strange behavior over the years of trying to use her relationship with this famous writer alternately to kind of represent herself in a good light, or to denounce her for kind of cred. You
Clout
know, this is
called.
for clout. Yeah, clout. This has become a thing. This is like it's we've moved from a culture where people simply show deference to the rich and powerful to one where you can accumulate clout of your own through denunciation, because denunciation of celebrities has become an important kind of cultural thing.
Yeah, but
Uh,
I think also the reason for this, I think it's important to say that the reason for this denunciation is that the woman who's doing it, like, is trapped in the culture war as well. And if
mm,
she thinks like everyone's calling my mentor a transphobe and I'm associated with her, I have to denounce,
mm,
otherwise the mob will come for me next. Like,
mm,
it's that type of mentality, and I find it fascinating that it's happening at this level. Like, a world renowned recognized writer um is now experiencing and talking about these things, because these have been going on like in politics, and particularly like on the left, for fucking years. That
mm,
if you were associated with someone who had the quote unquote wrong opinion, then you would be cancelled. Or you put someone on a platform for a debate that didn't subscribe to the same politics as you, but you wanted a broad range. If you platformed someone who didn't share certain beliefs, then you would be cancelled and people would boycott. Like, I mean, think of the reaction from some quarters when we invited Kenny McCaskill onto the election show, for example.
mm,
Is that people want to cancel by association, and actually I think that's so dangerous for like political life. That there's certain people who it's not acceptable for us on the left to talk to. Like, I will literally talk to anyone. Like, I don't think that no platforming works as a tactic anymore.
mm.
Since the advent of YouTube, like,
Yeah,
the far right have hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of followers on YouTube. So no platform is gestural, and it is deferring to this kind of like cancel culture that we all kind of know exists. Um,
I mean, I'll have people tell me off for saying that the left has a culture of being censorious, and the thing is, it's as you say, the object of the censorship is not the dodgy politician or the far right activists. They are not the object of the deplatforming. The object of deplatforming is left wing people who would consider debating someone on the
well,
right. That's the
yeah.
person who's the target.
Well, I mean, remember, here's a great example of this. Do you remember when Eddie Dempsey from the RMT
Yeah.
like was speaking at a rally, and Ash Sarkar and Owen Jones pulled out because he was on the platform
It's
to
absolute
support
madness.
Brexit? Like, but the reason they pulled out, like, I just don't buy that it's principled. I think it's because like they were getting kickback from people, and
Cool.
I just don't. I think you should either like face it down, and this is what the essay is kind of trying to do. There's a really good bit at the start where in this she says, in this age of social media where a story travels the world in minutes, silence sometimes mean that other people can hijack your story, and soon their false version becomes the defining story about you. See, this is the thing, is like about taking the high ground and just ignoring it. Is that people will then like tar you by association. Do you know what I mean?
Of course I know. Of course I know. Because you and I, even me, even someone who doesn't really have like a reputation or a status to protect, really, like this is the thing. The secret life of this stuff is worse than the public stuff, right? So that embarrassing situation where you have, um, a left-wing media commentator pulling out of a joint rally with a left-wing young trade unionist because he supports Brexit, right? Is embarrassing enough, right? The public image of it. But you and I and many, many, many left wing activists have had phone calls where or people sending you messages saying, "I think it's important that you distance yourself from this
Yeah,
person." Right? And it
yeah,
might even, by the way, be someone who you're not friends with,
yeah,
you don't work with, but people will say to you, "You need to be seen
yeah,
to denounce this person." Right? It could be someone you have no contact with, right? And like, I just routinely refuse. Like,
yes,
I'm not becoming part of this thing, right? And it's just bloody tedious apart from anything else. But it's yeah, it's totally absurd, and it is a real phenomenon. And the same people who will say that it's not a real phenomenon will try and cancel someone the very next day. Like, it's become that it's sort of knee jerk and unconscious that someone will, say that the whole thing is phony and it's just been cooked up by the tabloid newspapers, and then the very next day they'll say you should not be talking to this person, you shouldn't have retweeted from this or that publication, etc., etc., etc. But it was just interesting to see someone discussing the secret life,
yeah,
the secret life of this, the and the kind of shallow motivations of people in engaging in that kind of public behavior. If I had a friend, and one of the things she says is, because she was publicly denounced by a student for after those comments, and she said she should have contacted me, right? If you have a genuine disagreement, if I had a friend who had a genuine sort of moral disagreement with something that they'd said or something like that, I'd like to think I'd have the courage to address them privately on it, right? It's much harder to do that, by the way, to have an earnest discussion where you think a friend has gone wrong on something. It's quite emotionally difficult to have that conversation. It's much, much easier to denounce,
yeah,
and more cowardly and cheaper and just and ineffective apart from anything else, right? Um, I cannot imagine if I had a friend, someone who had given me time and helped me with stuff, um, that I would then denounce them because I thought it was important to dissociate myself from
yeah.
something that they'd done. It's
And
absurd.
that's the thing. It's like all about like saving her own skin is what she's done. Um,
But and
what I was going to say there.
the kind of third act, so it's a kind of like
Well,
a true story in
before we
three acts.
go on to the third act, my favorite paragraph in this whole thing that I just is like the most perfect articulation of how I feel about this. It says, in a deluded way, you will convince yourself that your hypocritical, self regarding, compassion free behavior is in fact principled feminism. Like, I love that. Like, because I do think that, like, you know, um, certain things, become weaponized. Like, when I tweeted during the parliamentary inquiry into the handling of the Alex Salmond case, that Sturgeon, wasn't a victim, stop treating like actually the most powerful person in the country, arguably, as some kind of like, victim, and it's terrible for her and how hard this must be for her. People like women just like rounded on me, and like were very personal. And I think it is hypocritical, self-regarding, and compassion free. Like, I have no fucking time for that. Like, you like I hate this idea of like, because you're a woman, whenever you're up against a man, there must like be sexism, or you must be weak, or you must be a victim, or you must be at risk. Like, I hate this constant denial of agency in modern feminism, and I hate the way that it's wielded against people who are pointing out the problems with it. And
Mm-hmm.
so it then goes on to say, it isn't. You will wrap your mediocre malice in the false gauziness of ideological purity, but it's still malice. You tell yourself that being able to parrot the latest American feminist orthodoxy justifies your hacking at the spirit of a person who had shown you only kindness. And then this last line, which is like, I mean, amazing. It says, you can call your opportunism by any name, but it doesn't make it any less of the ugly opportunism it is. Mwah!
Mm.
Magnificent.
Yeah,
Because that's
yeah.
what this is. It's opportunism. It's people like, trading in things like reputation, using, certain types of politics to virtue signal. And I am going to use that phrase.
Yeah, it's a shame that some right winger probably coined that first, because it unfortunately does quite accurately sum up the situation. What I found interesting about it as well was like, and it really set me to thinking. Like, at one point she says, there's a deeply kind of competitive spirit imbued in all this. This is, it's a very kind of self-serving. There's almost like the people who are involved in this behavior, they're almost self-consciously involved in a kind of rat race. Do you know what I mean? They're almost self-consciously in sort of, there's a huge amount of one-upmanship, survival, and it just sort of occurred to me that there must be psychological and emotional effects for, and she makes it generational as well. Like she says, like this is a phenomenon among younger people more than anything else. It did kind of make me think like there are psychological consequences to growing up in a society where most of the institutional solidarity has been destroyed.
Yeah.
The market is the only arbiter of morality. And there is no question whatsoever that middle class people use allegations, including guilt by association, to remove people from jobs, to, we've discussed this before, to grow a social media following, etc., etc. There's no question of the
Totally.
directly material competitive instinct in play here. In the case of this young woman, she actually had cultural products to sell, and she was worried that they would be damaged by her
Yeah.
association
Yeah.
to a
So,
famous
and
author. I mean, middle class people produce little else. They produce little else. But I was reading about this recently in the end of history, which we'll be bringing you a special podcast on at some point. Um, they make this point about, well, drawing on Thomas Piketty, about what he calls the Brahmin left, that there's a section of the population now whose sole function is like the reproduction of official morality in society. And that much of the kind of university educated middle class left is like a priest class. Like its main product is that it has morally superior attitudes that it seeks to dispense across society. And if you think about huge layers of that, like the media, so preachy, academia, NGOs, there is a large percentage now of the population, right? I mean, a minority, but a chunk. There is a chunk of the population. It could be 10 or 15% of the population whose essential social function is to preach moral virtues to society. And as we know from the history of priest classes, this is a fundamentally hypocritical social function,
I mean,
right?
the problem with it is that it's not virtue. It's not a moral code. It's the appearance of a moral code. So,
Mm-hmm.
do you know what I mean? It's not actually like it's not an evangelical thing. It's just the appearance. It's just a shell, because the actual, moral of, how we treat people with compassion and loyalty and those sorts of things that really matter, is thrown out the window when it comes to the opportunity to cancel someone for something that they've said, like in this situation. And the essay makes the point, which I think is key, that the assumption of good faith is dead. Like, and that's part of the problem. Like, there's sometimes when I've tweeted things where I'm being like, people could really like misread this and accuse me of, this, that, and the other. And because people do deliberately misread things in order to further their own agenda. Like that is a fact. Like people will accuse others of sexism, for example, in order to put forward a particular point of view or further their own politics. I've seen it happen.
Yeah. The other thing that the point the book makes is like this is a huge boon to the right, because if you look at the cultural message that the right now projects, whether it's Silvio Berlusconi, who was kind of the architect, or Trump, or Boris Johnson, right? There's something interesting about all these characters, which is they are extremely relaxed about you finding out how immoral they are, right?
Completely.
And the reason that people like that, and the reason that people vote for it, right? And they vote for it. Like people voted for Silvio Berlusconi. Trump got the
Trump,
highest
yeah.
vote for a Republican ever. Boris Johnson is striding,
Mm,
particularly English politics, like a colossus, right? The reason that people vote for it is because their cultural message is I give you license not to be anxious about your moral status all the time,
yeah.
right? What they're saying to people is ignore the Brahmins. I give you license to ignore the Brahmins, and I'm the most powerful person in the country. Silvio Berlusconi did this perfectly. The Bunga Bunga parties really helped him because most people can look back at their lives and think things like, I've been engaged in like sexual indiscretions. A lot of people in society know that they've cheated on their partner. A lot of people in society know that they view porn on the internet. A lot of people in society know how dirty their own minds are, right? The fact that the man in charge of the country, and people say, well, it's a masculine thing. It's partly that. It's more the fact that most people know that they have a capacity for what might be considered sexual immorality. And the most powerful man in the country is openly engaging in it.
Yeah.
And that gives you license, not to go out and carry on like that necessarily, but at least to forgive yourself, at least to remind yourself that these abstract moral principles are just that they don't sum up who you are, that you can be someone who makes indiscretions and still be a fundamentally good person, or at least not a fundamentally bad person.
Yeah.
That's such a powerful tool for
Yeah.
the right to
That's
have.
because that's the reality, is that people are incredibly flawed and they make mistakes and they say the wrong thing, but they can still be fundamentally good people. I mean, this is the problem when everything is seen through black and white, and when everything is seen as like you're either on this side or you're on that side, is that there's no room for gray. And this is like my politics at the moment, is like I always just like try and see like where the gray is, like where are the contradictions, where are the outliers in this situation. And that's, yeah, that's the problem with the culture war, is that there is no nuance.
Yeah, and there's no room for humanity. There's no, and I
No.
mean that in an explicit sense, and that there's no room for who humans really are. Right? There's only room for a fantastical projection of the perfect moral being. There's no room for the actual human material of society. I mean, this author was denounced because of the views that she espoused on what to most people is one particularly heated but quite marginal debate. They wouldn't have known the difference between using the word woman and trans woman, right? They wouldn't have understood the distinction. It's so technical. She had to be denounced for saying that. But again, that like people, if they pay any attention, they're watching someone be denounced for a form of words, the distinction of which they don't understand, when they themselves know that they've been bigoted. They themselves know that they once got drunk and punched their dad. They themselves know that, like I said, they've broken the law here or there. They themselves know that they are capable of much worse and more destructive things than a form of words. And what message does that send to them? What message does it send to the majority of people in society who know how morally frail they are? And this isn't, by the way, a discussion about giving people license to behave in, I don't know, destructive or reactionary ways or whatever. People are going to do that anyway. This is a conversation, like, this is about compassion and about realism, about the human condition. And if you're not even willing to do that, then who are you talking to? You're not talking to society at that point. You're not even attempting to talk to the real societies that actually exists. You're just involved in a competition between other layers of your thin social element whose fundamental product is morality.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that she said was that trans women are trans women, and I think that what she's then clarified is that of course they are women, but in talking, she said, of course they're women, but in talking about feminism and gender, it's important for us to acknowledge the differences in experiences of gender. Um,
Yeah, but the point is, like, whatever the debate might be,
but yeah,
it's
that's the point. It doesn't really matter. Like, it
so
doesn't really
granular.
matter the nuance of it. It's
So
just
you've
that
got
people
on
are like jostling to like throw the first punch. Like
yeah.
everyone's like
So
it
on
is
the
competitive.
on the left, you have a novelist getting trashed for that, right? For a granular disagreement. And on the right, you've got Berlusconi swaggering around being like, haha, I've fucked loads of teenagers. It's great. Go out and have fun, right? Who do people think ultimately is gonna is gonna be more likable in the public? It's obvious. And we have the proven record. The last 20 or 30 years of Western politics has been utterly dominated by the right. And that has structural reasons and all sorts. It also has cultural reasons.
Well, I mean, obviously, Scottish politics hasn't been free of sexual scandal, especially the left.
Indeed, indeed. Um, but this is the point, right? So in the book, they make this point. They say because the right is openly amoral, right? Because the right says things like, "Oh, the world's just a competition," right? This is the other thing. This is why who you always get people saying, "Oh, right-wing populists talk about how the left are the elites, but the real elites are the multimillionaires." But the multimillionaires never pretended to be anything else, right? The multimillionaires go around saying to people, I care about me and I care about success for me. You can't call someone like that a hypocrite, right? They're telling you the truth. Whereas the left makes pompous moral claims about itself and then can't live up to them because no one can live
Because
up
no
to
one
them.
can live up to them. No, totally, I agree.
Tommy Sheridan. This is the thing, all right?
But like,
He,
we've made like a massive rod for our own back, like
of
on this
course, right?
question. What were you going to say about Sheridan?
So he got caught doing what Berlusconi gets caught doing,
Yeah, but the problem
handing
is that he had presented himself to the electorate as this
as
like
a
family
virtuous.
man, like
Yeah, yeah.
a virtuous family man, non-drinking and all that.
I remember when he exactly. So the charge of one of hypocrisy. You can't trust him, right? He preaches one thing and then he behaves in a separate way. Berlusconi has a unified personality. His public persona is his private persona,
Yeah,
right? His
yeah,
private debauchery is his public appeal,
yeah.
right? Um, Now, this is the thing about all this moralizing, right? Every single moralizer is a liar, right? Every single one. If you understand human nature, you know that everyone's got skeletons in the closet. If you go around,
Rattling about in there,
yeah,
bulging,
yeah.
close the fucking doors,
They've,
locked.
they've got a spin class going on in there. Do you know what I mean? It's that closet is like a TARDIS, right? There's a fucking skeleton army in there. Um, so the moralizers are just as immoral as the people who are like maybe not some of the worst sociopaths, right? But the people who are quite open about their body kind of awful behavior and all the shagging and the coke and all the rest of it, right? They're the same. So all it means is you're going to have a bunch of people who constantly get found out, and they do, right? And especially in a heightened culture of denunciation.
But that whole thing has really tarnished the left. I'm thinking particularly about an experience that I had when I was running for as the Rise candidate. And I had obviously been talking about like railing against inherited wealth.
Mm.
Um, and I was asked in an interview, like, how can you talk about the housing crisis, when you have a flat in the West End?
Da,
Like,
da, da.
do you know what I mean? Going for this angle. which I think is ridiculous that people who have a mortgage can't talk about like the housing crisis. It's
Mm.
fucking stupid. It's a classic right wing tool. And then the next, thing, I was just like, well, basically what happened was that when my gran passed away, she left me, some money. I mean, she left me about £6,000, and her whole like thing for me was that she wanted me to be able to like live independently. And so I just saved some of that money and then, put together a deposit and got a flat. And then this other journalist picked this up and wrote a whole column about how much of a hypocrite I was, how disgraceful it was that I was daring to, say anything about inherited wealth when, my gran had left me money. And I actually, I went back to the paper to ask for right of reply, because I was like, this is absurd. This is actually, and also, let's be honest, quite cruel. Because I was very close to my grandmother, and the way that this had been written was just, it was as if my granny, who was like a cleaner in lawyers' offices up until she was in her 70s, was some kind of like,
Magnate, yeah.
yeah, like tycoon. Like my gran
Yeah.
in the fucking high-rise flats in Coatbridge is like somehow a multi-millionaire. Like it's just not how it works. So there is a degree to which I'm just like, it was very unfair, and I was denied the right of response. And the journalist messaged me, and I was like, I was really hurt by what you did and what you said. And she said, well, if you're a person who's concerned about poverty, you should have taken that money your gran left you and donated it to a charity.
No, but isn't that classic though? It's like the other thing is people now mistake all politics for identity
That
politics,
exactly,
morality.
and that's what I mean by this, like, rod for her own back. So like she gets to use the oldest and stupidest anti-socialist argument known to humanity, that I'm a hypocrite, because I condemn inherited wealth, whilst, quote, from an actual line in her thing was, benefiting from inherited wealth and privilege by using like this small amount of money that my gran left.
Yeah.
I'm not a fucking wealthy dowager princess and, turned up with a lorry load of cash.
But that's the product of
But
two.
even if I did, it shouldn't be a fucking problem. Like that's the point. Like
Yeah.
Tony Benn, for example, like he was the biggest scourge of inherited wealth and privilege in recent British history. It's only like the Daily Mail that runs lines like Tony Benn's a hypocrite.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, they probably wouldn't anymore because he became so popular towards the end of his life that he had to be revered on all sides of politics. But that's a product of two things. One, the absolute sort of negative brain trust that is the Scottish media. And because, by the way, you'll find that basically all like 90% of journalists would agree with that, right? That the problem with left wing politics is that well, you don't have a right to talk about it unless you live in sackcloth and ashes, unless you're living in rags. You don't get to talk about poverty, inequality, or whatever. But it is also, as you say, it's the product of the left's trading in politics for morality.
Yeah.
You leave your like as a general creed, we are wide open to accusations of hypocrisy, because we've stopped saying to people that, look, the reason why I agree with socialism is because I want to live in a different type of social order where there is not obscene and irrational imbalances in wealth and power. And do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it is like it's an argument based on a critique of existing society that is fundamentally rational in its character, or attempting to be rational, and an alternative which is both socially just and again rational and sustainable and so on. Now left-wing people don't talk about politics in that kind of way. Very often they'll just sort of say things like, they'll need to relate it to like, I've been done a moral wrong, and XYZ is oppressed, and it's disgusting that they're oppressed, and that needs to stop. There's not. It's kind of lost an objectivity.
Yeah, but part of this is also because, you know, the pundits who write these type of articles, or say these sorts of things, they're the ones complaining that politics is uninteresting and lacking in ideas. but they're just fucking intellectually lazy. Like they've also been part of this like climate of suspicion and paranoia, and where you can't say that you're against inherited wealth for fear of or whatever it is, because you might then be exposed in your private life, and that's like it just feeds into that culture of conformity. Do you know
Mm.
what I mean? Like, in my situation, like this journalist was saying that someone needs to like someone who's a socialist needs to give up all their wealth and possessions and live a life of poverty. Like that's what you need to do to be a socialist.
Yeah.
But that reminds me of being at parties with anarchists who were like all stoned and being like, well, how can you oppose private property when you've got a telly? Like, my politics isn't about taking people's fucking tellies and nationalising them. It's
Yeah,
not
no.
about like stopping grannies giving their grandchildren like small bequests. Like, socialism for me is about like, addressing the issue that exists of millionaires leaving their children more fucking money than someone can spend in a lifetime. Like
Mhm.
that's the reality of inherited wealth.
It's
It's
painful, isn't it, when like you can draw a thread of utter stupidity all the way from some dreadlocked, doped up anarchist, right, in a dingy flat, through to the leading like journalists in the country, fundamentally sharing completely bovine attitudes about the world,
completely.
failing to escape a sort of baseline morality. It's pretty sad.
I mean, it's just part of that, you know. I mean, I guess calling the left hypocrites gets clicks, but the left has created that culture,
Mm.
especially around moral issues. Um, that's my take.
In conclusion, we need a left wing Silvio Berlusconi.
I tell you, I wouldn't be against that. Like, I like a sort of like sexy male leader.
um, so well, yeah. Uh,
Might edit that bit out.
we are we'll be advertising that role in coming weeks. Apply for it.
I mean, are our listeners sexy? I have no idea. I hope they are. I
Yeah.
think they're probably more just like us, though.
I like to think they are as well. Let's maintain the illusion.
Listeners, tweet us and tell us if you're sexy or not.
Is that us?
Fuck yeah. We've been talking for like an hour and a half,
Jesus.
maybe more.